Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon your time zone. My name is Seth Early, and welcome to our webinar series. Today, we're talking about the impact of generative AI and traditional search. I'm going to talk about OpenAI's Search GPT, but we're also going to talk about Google's efforts. We're going to talk about, how this differs from traditional search, how it's there's still some similarities. And we have a great panel today. We have Jeff Hoyle and Patrick Hoeffel. Did I say it correctly, Patrick?
Heffel, but that's okay.
Close enough, right? So Jeff, why
Yep.
don't you, and I've been in the space for over 30 years in the information management space. I wrote a book in 2020 about ontologies, and there was a great post the other day about how Palantir's secret to success, their secret sauce is ontologies. I meant to repost that, but we've been talking about ontologies for a very long time. And everything in that book, even though it was pre-Chat GPT popularity, is still valid today, right? It's still about the data and the information architecture, the knowledge architecture, taxonomies, ontologies. And again, this article talked about Palantir, who's very well known and pioneer in the space. It's like, oh, they use ontologies, that's their secret sauce. But Jeff, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of your background?
My name is Jeff Coyle. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer for MarketMuse. I have been in the search engine space, whether I'm building search engine platforms, ad servers, or MarketMuse, which is a content strategy software solution, identifying things to create, what to update. We're the first in market for content briefs, automated content plans. And our secret sauce is also knowledge graphs, which we have 2 patents in building knowledge graphs to understand what it means to be an expert on a topic. I love taxonomies too. All right, Patrick.
So,
Hi,
by the way, and Jeff, when I met Jeff when I was at the Marketing AI conference, the first conference, I think 2019 was it, or 2018? And I met Jeff and I wrote about MarketMuse in the book. So there's a case study, a chapter that talks about that. And yeah, knowledge graphs are kind of the ontology as the knowledge scaffolding plus the data to access. So, Patrick, why don't you give a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Seth. Patrick Heppel. I am managing partner of Patrick Heppel Partners and formerly with LucidWorks, and before that, consulting and software startups. I'm a software engineer by trade and training, so my roots are in software and even more than that in data. I have a private passion for knowledge graphs and the structure of data, and it kind of brings us all together on this topic. So I have a long history in search, and am excited to get going on this today.
That's terrific. And so let's go ahead and jump in. And I think that we want to thank our sponsors, CMS Wire and Vector, VKTR. That's the new publication from CMS Wire. I'm actually going to be writing an article with Patrick. And by the way, Patrick was also the author of this series. So thank you, Patrick, for that. Whoops. But we do have a poll. We want to get your input on that. And then there's only one poll today. And then after the webinar, there'll be a survey as well. So if you can just spend a few minutes, we'll try to keep it to 50 minutes, try to have answer questions, but put questions in your Q&A panel and we'll try to answer those as we go. And we are recording. So if you have to end early or you want to share this with a colleague, you can certainly do that. Early information science, as I mentioned, we've been around for 30 years. Our whole claim to fame is making information more usable, findable, and valuable, but that's through things like information architecture first. So I coined a phrase called "there's no AI without IA" a number of years ago, and that's been an industry catchphrase, but it's also very true. Right? There's still an article out there from 2016 where I coined that phrase, and someone just posted it to LinkedIn the other day, a couple months ago, to saying it was more important today than in 2016. So these are the rest of the series. They're going to be every couple of weeks. So I know that's quite a pace, and you may want to just register for them, and then you can listen to recordings at your leisure. But if you can make it, great. So we'll be talking about product and e-commerce. We'll talk about, again, generative engine optimization, accuracy in generative AI, the practical reality of large language models, vendor AI strategies. So we're hoping to get some of the vendors on the call to discuss things in a non-sales and marketing way, and then how AI is really impacting people and their lives and their careers. So here's a quick first survey. Where are you on your journey, your Gen AI journey? That where is it not on the radar? Are you in the planning stages? Are you doing controlled experiments? Is it banned? Are you implementing POCs? Is it generally deployed? Is there none of the above? So I try to watch the popcorn popping. I like to say it goes very quickly and then it starts slowing down. And you know how your popcorn is in your microwave. You have to shut it off before it burns. So I'm going to shut it off before your brains start burning. So a lot of folks are implementing POCs, still controlled experiments. Some folks not on the radar. Banned. I see one person is banned. And then let's see what else here. None of the above. So let us know none of the above. I'm just going to give this another minute or so. So go ahead and choose your answer if you would. So I think we are not, well, maybe there's a couple more rolling in. See a couple changes here and there, but it looks like implementing POCs is winning. And of course, there's questions on that, you know, how well are those POCs going? We're building POVs, proof of value, because we don't want to build the concept. We want to show the value. Okay, so let's go ahead and end those and share the results so you can kind of see where that's at. Let me scroll down a little bit. Oops. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You can see the last little bit here. Okay, so a couple of folks are none of the above. We'd be curious as to what that means. But, you know, there's some that are not on the radar, a lot of them implementing POCs. A couple of people have generally deployed. So interesting distribution. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about traditional search. So when we think about this traditional search, what does it do, right? Traditional search creates what's called a forward index of content. It says, what are the words that are contained in a document? And you can kind of see that on the right, that's used to derive metadata, right? That's used to derive, when you build a search index, that's metadata about documents. Then that index is inverted. So you say, what documents contain certain keywords? Now, that's a very watered down version. We also have explicit metadata. So if we do faceted search, or we do metadata-based search, and then there's all sorts of flavors around semantic search and so on. Metadata in a content management and knowledge system is explicit, but we also, when we're building a search index, we are deriving metadata with that index. But it's more than that, because there's lots of other signals. So incoming links and site age and influence and so on. And Jeff, you can speak to all of those signals, I'm sure, but Google uses 200 signals in its ranking algorithm. But at the end of the day, it's really about the document and trying to understand what's in that document, what terms are there, and then inverting that so that we can start to say, what documents can I pull up if I use these terms? So that's kind of the idea of basic search. But then we start looking at vector search. And this is my attempt at explaining what vectors are. They're in n-dimensional space. We can think in 3 dimensions. You know, in this case, you can think of size, style, and color are 3 dimensions, right? And I can zero in on a piece of content, but we can have many more dimensions. And the analogy I use is, if you have a GPS, it'll give you latitude and longitude and elevation, perhaps, of a location. Usually your GPS just give you latitude and longitude, but you could theoretically say I have 3-dimensional representation of a piece of data. And let's say I'm at a physical space. You know, I'm here in this valley, and that's 3 dimensions. But what if I start saying, well, I want a restaurant? Okay, that's a 4th dimension, right? I want something there. What type of food? Well, I want Italian. That's another dimension. I want a price range of, X dollars. I want a certain rating. Those become additional dimensions of that data. And you can think of this the same way. When you think about vector spaces, they are n-dimensional. They can have thousands, tens of thousands of dimensions. And those dimensions represent the different features of a piece of content. So it's a mathematical representation, and it's a mathematical representation of the content, of the phrase, of the documents, of things that are chunked and brought into that vector space. And so when we think about generative search, there's a number of different ways to do this. And Jeff is going to talk about some of the different ways incarnations of this. But we're using the large language model to understand the intent of the user. What are they trying to say? In the old days of doing utterances and chatbots, we had to classify utterances into intent. So if you said, I can't, I'm locked out of my computer, I can't remember my username, my password doesn't work, my computer's mad at me. All of those things will say, oh, change password, right? And so that's utterance to intent. We're doing the same thing when we start asking long prompts and asking questions. We are trying to understand where that prompt is in vector space, right? And then we're saying, well, what is near it in vector space, right? In these n dimensions, thousands of dimensions. And so you can start to match that and say, okay, here's an answer. Now, again, There's much more complexity to it than that. But because there's all sorts of self-attention mechanisms and there's all sorts of feedback loops and so on. But the idea is that, when we're doing this, we're trying to pull back something that is close in vector space. And then we can also include citations, right? If we are under certain circumstances. But Patrick, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about the bigger picture of how this kind of compares to different types of approaches. Whoops, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Today, I'm going to use OpenAI's implementation of the search space as an example, but it applies to Google and Yahoo and everybody else. When ChatGPT is building its foundation models like GPT-4o and the new o1 and all of that, when all of the AI builders are creating their foundation models, including Google and Meta, everyone, they go out and gather as much information as possible. And there is a web crawler that OpenAI has written, and the user agent is called GPT bot, and it crawls the internet just like Google crawls the internet. A lot of people crawl the internet. And as it gathers information, it gets used to put that into the foundation models that we have been using for the last couple of years. And when you ask ChatGPT a question, it hits the foundation model. But as I think we've all experienced, those crawls cut off at a certain point. And even the latest Strawberry GPT-o1 model that is just freshly released in the last few days, its date cutoff is October of 23. So a year ago is the last time that data was crawled. So all of that information goes into this one foundation model, and that becomes available. Next, so that's what you see on your results page. Now, sometimes if you're using Search GPT, this is new. It's still experimental. OpenAI has released it, and some people have access to it. It is a corollary or competitor to Google, and Google's crawlers are perpetually running all the time, and your data in a Google search can be as recent as a few minutes ago or a few days ago, but it's usually not older than that. OpenAI uses a different crawler using a different user agent, and you can see on the left-hand side, the OAI-search bot is the crawler, the Google corollary crawler, and the data it crawls goes into a different page repository, and that page repository is then used by the Search GPT engine in conjunction with the foundation model to serve your results. But it's different data, it's current data as opposed to a year ago. And it's important to understand that the mechanism by which that data comes to you when you submit a question to Search GPT, as opposed to the question you submit to Chat GPT, the crawled responses come from different repositories. So lastly, Seth, is when you're using ChatGPT, sometimes it will do a live lookup against some website, like maybe it'll go read a Wikipedia page to answer your question in ChatGPT. That is live crawled content, and it uses still a third user agent called ChatGPT-user. And this is listed on the OpenAI website. Anybody can see what the user agents are that they use. But the point is, it's a live crawl while the search is preparing the response to you, and it goes into a different repository. And again, it runs up against the foundation model. And but the process by which your answer is derived is very different. And I just wanted to kind of put out there that there are different mechanisms based on different use cases that companies like OpenAI, as well as Google, as well as Amazon, as well as Meta, as well as Perplexity, as well as all the others, they all use these different mechanisms against different data repositories to answer your questions.
Excellent.
Cool.
And what what is so interesting about this is this leads to lots of different potential experiences because there's analogous stuff on the Google side. And that's what Jeff is going to get into now. So Jeff, why don't you start deconstructing Google search? And again, there's analogous pieces to OpenAI and ChatGPT and ChatGPT search, but let's talk about how this kind of gets a little bit confusing. And I know you described it the other day as a melee, right?
Yeah, I like to think of, if I'm a marketer, or if I'm representing my clients or I'm representing myself, I like to think about all the battles that I'm in for findability and for traffic and for brand perspective, having my perspective represented well, whatever my brand perspective is. And I think that it requires me to think about all of the different battles or melees that I'm in at any given time. And the first one, which everyone is very familiar with, would be a Google search result. And we've all said, Google search result has ads and 10 blue links was the original thing. It couldn't be any further from the truth that it's ads and 10 blue links now. Across the top here, you have other components and search engines with news, with images. There's even one just to show me web content, and don't weave in some of these other features or packs of data. But even in this search result for what is CRM, I used to run whatis.com and searchcrm.com when I led TechTarget's traffic search and engagement team. So I tend to use a lot of CRM examples. But even in this specific example, you see an AI overview, which was originally called, you may have heard it referenced as a search generative experience. That was the first wave. Then they branded it as AI overviews. You'll also see organic search results. In this case, it's a unique one, which is why I used it. You see, we call it the indent, right? You have the main page and then some indented secondary pages. You also see what they call people also ask, which is a list of common questions that may allow you to refine your query, or they're trying to catch a lot of intents here, right? So what's the next steps for the user? Now you find the fun stuff for us knowledge graph people. You get that knowledge panel on the right. This can also be on the top. It can cover the entire top. Another query you might want to search after this is Boston Terrier. I use that one all the time because I have 2 of them. But across the top, you'll see a full page knowledge panel. So you can see that sometimes in the right rail, sometimes across the top. That is coming from collect connections between my query and Google's knowledge graph infrastructure, Google's structured data. And it's going to pull references, in this case from Wikipedia. It'll also have packs of data people also search for, is in a good example, or PASF. These are saying when we trigger customer relationship management through the knowledge graph, we also tend to have people who are looking for these other things in the knowledge graph. We can get into so much details of how to connect the dots on these things. But the key in this slide is to note you are fighting when you're building content and you're trying to make it found in Google. You're trying to get into AI overviews. You're trying to get into organic search. You're trying to get into PAA. You're trying to get into make sure that everything you possibly have structured so that anything that has structured data and more. So let's go to the next page. Your next page here is
schema.org is important for.
Yeah, exactly. Schema for sure.
Yeah.
And so just unpacking this is really, really important. And from the previous page, what you noted, there's actually was only one blue link above the fold, and it was Salesforce. It was the only thing that's coming from organic search, general organic search. And so that's the kind of core of Google's, their bread and butter, everything from Google's organic search. That's where you need to make sure that your pages are being crawled by Googlebot. Make sure that they are fast, that they are, from a technical SEO perspective, appropriate, making sure they're accessible, making sure that you're telling the story of expertise through the structure of your content and the quality of your content. And then you have off-page factors, signals that Google receives from your own linking structure, and then external inbound links that your site might have received. That is the traditional search engine optimization effort. People also ask, isn't, right? That's because Google is able to really dive deeper and analyze content more effectively than it can ever, has ever in the past. So this is where a specific question may lead to a best answer scenario, because Google is able to see at the passage level or the site page chunk and the site chunk level to determine, do I have a good candidate to answer this question right now? One cool thing I'll just also, like the Boston Terrier example, is go to a PAA on your search result and click it a bunch of times. It'll expand infinitely and give you more questions that align with your intent. So it's actually Google just telling the story that they don't really know the right answer. They're trying to act as a buffet to get you to the likely best answer for you based on today, right? Knowledge panel, like I mentioned, comes from the knowledge graph. You can actually access the knowledge graph. There you have a knowledge graph API. There's a number of tools that will allow you to do this as well. A PASF is a cool example where these are other concepts that are connected. So what is the likelihood that you would be an expert on customer relationship management and not have any coverage of human resources? Not all that likely, right? Not have any coverage of business intelligence. Okay. Then you're very much a one-trick pony in that scenario. So thinking like vectors, a 3D space, what's the likelihood that you cover CRM really well, right? And you never talk about leads? Not very likely. So Google's able to tell the story based on topicality and distance between these two things to say, it's highly likely if you have a great publishing site about CRM that you're going to also cover these other things. So it's not just about one page for one word. You have to tell the story of expertise to be found in core organic search and then to be connected to all of these features. So the next slide, I'll get a little bit more fun for you. Now, this is AI overviews. Okay. See those little links next to everything? That was actually after Google got a little hand smack, right? Their first version of Google of Search Generative Experience didn't have those. They were just acting. This was acting more like a book report, right? And they were because this is their implementation of what they call retrieval augmented generation. It's through a number of models, and we can get into those if you really want to over a beer. But basically, they're getting into the details
Your beer
of
for the session.
yes, because right after the session, right? And then they're giving citations used more in a better way than they have before. So what reference is it? There's actually a site I used to manage. What is CRM right there, Tech Target? It is actually showing the links of the references it used to create this kind of mediocre book report, right? So this is something where if you're in Google's search index and you're showing authority, showing expertise, you will graduate to being in the pool of pages that could be cited by a mediocre book report. And that's how AI overviews is working, right? So what is it? I need to be here to potentially be there to potentially be summarized and then linked and I will be illustrative of a solution for this answer. Fun fact for anybody, initially this was showing for a lot of things. Now what we're seeing is a lot of informational queries are getting AI overviews. Have they cracked the code for commercial, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel? I think what we're seeing right now is they're going back to the drawing board and improving, but we should expect generative responses for a lot more types of intents over time. So again, you got to be in main search, be potentially in an AI overview citation for your content to be used for this augmented generation. Next, we already talked about PAA a little bit, but I wanted to highlight something interesting. I didn't highlight that text. Google did. Google's able to tell me that that passage of text within a page answers this question. Okay. So that's key when you're making content is to understand what value is this content bringing and do I answer common questions, maybe not as a Q&A, just naturally in my text. And if I am going to do it as an FAQ, I want to mark that up with schema, telling these search engines, this is actually a question and answer section. Or it may also just happen naturally in my content. Interesting situation here. The title tag from this page was from Salesforce India. So just wanted to show you lots of different ways Google analyzes this stuff. Doesn't necessarily happen to show the exact same pages. Next, structured data. When I see unstructured data, I want to turn it into structured data. It's just part of who I am and how I operate, right? In this case, part of that buffet of intents was maybe if someone's searching CRM, they're looking for a job, right? Structured data illustrated that ZipRecruiter has good insight and expertise on what CRM people make, right? And look, it's even showing me the table. So you always want to understand these are all different battles that we're fighting. Am I understanding the entire information journey? Is my content exhibiting that? Am I understanding how to get found generally? Am I exhibiting expertise? Am I answering questions? All of these things connect to winners. Now we're going to get into the fun stuff, the LLMs and the generative AI. First here, right? ChatGPT is not a language model. If we had a poll, I'd say how many people knew that? Okay, hopefully everyone, but we'll see. It's not a language model. What ChatGPT is an application. It's a software application, right? It can be any software application and connect to OpenAI's language models. I love to show this because it shows this very obviously, right? I can pick my model, right? There's hundreds, thousands of accessible models that you can be using in your organization. ChatGPT is just the first one that went to public access in a simplified user experience that produced pretty good results. So keep in mind, it is an application that sits on top of an LLM. Now, what is that? Why is that important? Because it has constraints and filters and settings. Constraints would be if I ask it something horrible, right? It will say, nah, I'm not answering that. Or it might even ignore you because it has, ethical constraints. It has legal constraints built in. So there is a layer of that built into this. It's not direct access to the LLM, which would also have separate types of constraints, even direct access to the API. The next would be each of these models is good for something better, good for some things, not good for others. They have different, as Patrick mentioned, the last time they updated their core foundation, okay? They all have different dates. So knowing what you're hitting, knowing what model you're hitting is critical. Seth also mentioned O1 preview, and Patrick did too. That's Strawberry was its original go-to-market. O1 preview is the first one that's doing reasoning. So it's a precursor to artificial general intelligence. The cool thing there is, I think I'll show an example. It actually will tell you how it reasoned through your query or reasoned through your prompt. But first things first, keep in mind, you are not hitting a large language model with an API. You are using a software application that has access to many models. Next. All right. You can also go into incognito mode like you can with Google, like all the SEOs do. If you're SEOs, if you know incognito mode is on Chrome, it means like don't use any of my bookmarks, don't use any of my search history, don't use any personalization. You can do that with ChatGPT called temporary chat. It will give you a generic response, the one that doesn't have your customization. And on the next slide, you have settings, you have memory. It will literally just keep a memory of all the things you're doing, try to give you a better response. I have a cool memory example, not as illustrated as a slide, but keep that in mind. What you see is based on the really, really specific things you type in your prompts in that experience, but also all the other experiences you've had, unless you are using temporary chat. Custom instructions. My custom instructions are really, really fun. Because I'm usually getting stuff for content strategy and all. I have detailed custom instructions. Think about, I do what's called reflection in my custom instructions. I do system prompting where it's basically saying like, you are always the best content strategist in the world, like really, really specific because I want my responses to come as close to me and be personalized. But think about this. What you type in is dictated by everything you've ever typed in. If you have memory on any custom instructions, plus, lots of other configurations. So what does that mean? Just because you type something in and see your stuff that you want to win or you want to appear, doesn't mean everybody else will. Everybody else is going through having their own custom settings. Keep that in mind. Next one. All right. This is where it gets into the why. So I set that up. You are using an application that has filters. You may have personalization. All right. Now I type this query in. Based on what Patrick said, if I were to ask that and say, hey, what pages did you use to give me that great response? What is CRM? It's going to say, actually, I'm using my foundation model, so I didn't have any explicit external resources to reference. I commonly hear this from executives in a large pharmaceutical company a couple of days ago asked me, how can I best appear in ChatGPT? And I said, well, like, just based on you're not really appearing. It's going to give you its base information based on its, it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. But in this case, I can coach it along and do some things. And I don't want to get into exactly how LLMs work and predictive off of but you can basically say, okay, well, keep in mind, he's saying I like to anthropomorphize everything. So this language model is a person, and they're saying, if you would like, I can search for articles or references to support this information with citations. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Next slide. Yeah. Do that. Okay, cool. Well, what's its default? Lots of money went in for Microsoft. So when I say, yeah, cite the web, first thing it does is search for it in Bing. How about that? And take the top results. So that is OpenAI's browser tool. So when it processes your query, it thinks, gosh, I need to get some fresh information, or this user wants me to hit the web, it will use what it calls its browser tool, and it will try to get you some even more fresh information. It'll try to do a search. It'll try to do any of these things. Keep in mind, this just added another level of complexity, right? Of foundational model output, now fresh content on top, like a Sunday layer on top. Not an easy win. So now we are battling. Is our brand mentioned when people are querying around this concept out of the foundation model, right? Now it's possible I may need to also be in a relevant search engine so that I can be part of both parties, which is the same as Google. I want to be part of this party so I can be part of that party so I can be part of that party. I want to be part of the core infrastructure of general knowledge. I also want to be, when the browser tool gets invoked, I want to be in that as well, right? Keeping on going. This is that reasoning model, early AGI. When I asked it what is CRM, it thought for a few seconds. It said, let me see. CRM, okay, it's about strategies. It didn't think that it needed to do citations or anything like that. It just said, I need to think for a second. This is probably what they mean. I'm going to give you an easy answer. You can get this going into a long, deep stream of reasoning. When I ask for the best CRM solutions, and please cite relevant and recent pricing pages, all kinds of things. And maybe something you didn't notice, though, from the previous slides. I added a question mark here. Got to be really, really conscious about the way that large language models work. Even very, very specific changes in the way you prompt are going to yield different outcomes. So what is customer relationship management? What is CRM? Best CRM, right? Completely different. So even different users are going to get different responses, and even little spaces, dots, those get tokenized. It really, really matters. You can get different results. And I'll wrap this up with Search GPT. Super different, right? If you don't have access to this, try to send a note in your ChatGPT account if you haven't seen this before. And this is their first attempt at a search engine. You get a really simple answer in a lot of cases. If you ask a simple question, what is CRM? It's going to give you a simple answer. It's very similar to Google's featured snippet in a lot of cases. But what you might not notice, see that little thing that says sources in the bottom? Okay, cool. When we click on that, we go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Where'd you get that from? It has these sources initially hidden, but it is basically back to the way it was, right? That's the old 10 blue links appearing from a unique component. So if you didn't notice, I went from 10 blue links to this wacky buffet that we want to compete all in, to a unique experience with large language models, which is very user dependent and could be personalized, could be conversational. To Search GPT, which initially they're trying to give you a simple answer, and when you ask for the citations, they give you 10 blue links. And that is today's experience. You got to be in all of the places at all of the times. Cool.
So, what's so interesting, and that it was a great overview, Jeff. I really appreciated that tour of all those different user experiences. So, one of the things that that discussion on LinkedIn that Chris Penn had begun with, talking about, it was a great discussion thread. So I had reposted it. You can look under my LinkedIn profile to see it, or you can search for Chris Penn, or you can, I can include it in the follow-up to this. But, it's really interesting because even when companies are changing slightly the question or the statement or the prompt, even slightly, like having a period at the end and not having a period, that impacts the vector space. That changes the tokenization, and it can give you different results. So there's so many variables that need to be understood and need to be considered, you get into a combinatorial explosion of what the possibilities are and what you need to do. And we're going to come up with some basic ground rules at the end of this, but it becomes incredibly complex and difficult, and it's difficult to measure and it's difficult to optimize on. Patrick, we had talked a little bit about this. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you're looking at this from the perspective of what does this mean for users and what does this mean for different types of these experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, Jeff, I want to ask you to follow up on this real quickly. And that is one of the big differences between something you submit to an LLM to have returned to you versus something like a more traditional Google experience. If you submit what is CRM to Google 5 times in a row, you'll get pretty much the exact same results all 5 times. But if you do that with ChatGPT or one of the others, you're likely to get different results. Can you speak to that just a little?
Oh, absolutely. It's because that prompt isn't necessarily, it's certainly not equatable to a search query, right? And so that's why, prompts increasing in length on this slide is very critical, because you are not necessarily you're not giving a detail of who is evaluating this, what is their context, what is the format of the output that they desire. You're doing this in a very, very vague way with and you're asking to find, using probabilities to try to answer that response. So even ChatGPT will allow you to regenerate the same response. So even if it's not just 2 users on the same thing, you can be one user and say, yeah, give me another shot at that, and it will. And so I think that's always interesting, is regenerate this, and we'll take a different shot at this, because it is looking at this kind of predictively generating the most likely next token, next section when it's doing this response. Yeah, exactly right. So not to get into the NLG science, but it's basically saying, I'm going to take everything I have and try to do this, versus Google is interpreting a query. One of the hardest things that they do is trying to, determine what are the types of things one should respond. So some queries in Google have a fractured intent. There's, like I said, the buffet of options, and then some are really, really specific or explicit intent. Keeping in mind that's very different from, like, if you type the word bat in. Some of the bats are flying versus some of the bats are baseball bats. That's different meanings. So what I love to do with an LLM is to challenge how frequently will it interpret this word as one meaning versus the other, and that'll be dictated by its model. So Patrick, I think that last part covers some of the things you mentioned.
Yeah, sure does. Seth, were you going to comment?
Well, I was going to say that there is a question, but I wanted to get your thoughts, Patrick, on some of these other pieces here, and just get your interpretation and your commentary.
Yep. So LLM-powered search, generative search, is changing how we think about how we approach the search process. Statistically speaking, traditional search, keyword search, the length of your prompt is 1 to 3 terms, or 1 to 3 specific words. And that's all people tend to give it, because we've learned that that's the way to get the kind of results that we want. Be really specific and very short, very brief, because as it gets longer, the answers get worse. That's what our experience has taught us. But with generative search, the experience is that a more expressive, more sentence-like query produces better results. And so we find that the prompts or the queries that are being submitted to generative search are getting longer, and the systems we're interacting with, whether it's Google Gemini or whether it's Meta in any of its various implementation forms, or whether it's ChatGPT or Perplexity or Grok or any of the others, because the nature of how it understands language is different, we are starting to see prompt length grow. And so as a consequence of that, what you normally find in Google, as soon as you start typing, you're going to get type ahead responses back that are suggesting, oh, did you mean, and it's auto completing your prompt for you, so that to help you know that you're kind of getting into the right neighborhood of where you're trying to get to, because it sort of understands what it thinks you're starting to say. There is no today, currently, for a lot of reasons, there is no type ahead in the generative search space, and that changes the way mentally we interact with the system. It changes the uh, I hate to use this word in a technical conversation, but it changes the emotional experience as well, in terms of how you feel about whether or not you're on the right track to getting the results you're looking for. Does it know me? Does it understand me? Type ahead offers a lot of that emotional reassurance that you're on the right track, and you don't get that with generative search experiences. Although I think we will see it eventually start to reappear.
Great.
But it's an important difference. And as we build these longer and longer contexts, as Jeff was saying, he builds whole paragraphs, and sometimes that's what you need to get the right answer. But it's one of the key differences between the traditional Google-like keyword experience and the generative experience.
No,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say, Patrick, paragraphs is an understatement in many
Yes.
in many cases. I'm sending to get a refined brief. I'm sending hundreds of thousands of tokens in hundreds and hundreds of queries to the LLM. So basically, chaining them together, referencing third-party data systems. So I mean, there is the complexity. Can be it can be very magical because you can use your own data. And I love, I'm all about human in the loop AI, and I want to you should be bringing your expertise in.
Absolutely.
When you're looking to author content or create strategy.
Absolutely. And understanding what those questions should be and what those prompts should be. And those prompts can run on for pages and pages. There's a company that I use to do some analysis of survey. It slowed me down because I haven't finished analyzing it yet, because it gave me so many possibilities. So I think that's the downside sometimes of LLMs and generative search. But we have a couple of questions that I want to try to get to. So how can I use knowledge of SEO and prompt design? This is from Jennifer. How does the SEO, and I guess that's could be a very nuanced question, because what aspect of SEO knowledge to do what? If you can say more of what you're trying to do. But Jeff, can you answer that broadly?
Well, I could field the question as I interpret it. If I were an expert in search engine optimization, how can I use the things I know about Google and the things I know from my experience as a search engine optimization expert to build great prompts? That's how I would answer that question. Hopefully, Jennifer, that's pretty close. So what I would be doing is understanding the way that Google is changing right now is to try to evaluate content more holistically and to understand what it means to be an expert on a topic, and to not just look at keywords on a page. And so when I'm building my prompt, she said, "Thank you. That's right." All right.
Okay, great.
When we're building that prompt, I want to make sure it's bringing in all the things Google has told me they love. What do they love? Expertise. They love experience. They love authority. They love trust signals, right? So they love my personal anecdote. Always, beautiful things like that. Style, tone, and voice must match, right? I want to build content that is amongst the clusters in which I currently live. If I'm all about kitty cats, I don't want to start writing about crypto, right? On my site and using my right. Maybe crypto cats. It's always the beer and the beach. You don't write one article that says the top beers to drink at the beach. That's not how you connect the knowledge. That's how you connect the vectors. Trust me. So in this case, make sure that if you're prompting for the purposes of generating strategy documents or plans, make sure that at each stage of the buy cycle, at each stage of the content life cycle, research, planning, prioritization, briefing, post-publish troubleshooting, post-publish optimization, all those stages, you need to bring the transcript from your CEO's last discussion about the topic. Bring who you are, what you know about it. That's actually what SEO is now. SEO is being an expert or a great journalist. and having that be reflected in your prompts, that's going to give you the magic you want. Hopefully that answers your question.
That's a great answer. And I think the idea is any area of expertise requires the same injection of your voice and your knowledge and your expertise and your experience and the anecdotes and so on, because that's going to enrich the content. And that's kind of the next piece. But I do have a question from Gabrielle Pividori. What would the ideal way to combine the two search approaches, generative plus Google? And we're kind of talking about the fact that there's so many different possible mechanisms, but you want to summarize that, Jeff or Patrick, either way?
Yeah, I'd love to hear Patrick's engineering side of this, because my background's in computer science and software engineering. So when I think about this answer, I'm thinking from an engineer's perspective.
The truth is, Google has already done that. And Jeff showed us a great example, a number of great examples about how the generative answer that comes at the top of the Google results, plus the addition of the standard results at the bottom, where the top part is essentially summarizing that result. And that's a classic. I hate to use the term classic when it's so new, but retrieval augmented generation RAG, right? It does essentially a Google-like keyword search to get the best relative responses, and then combines them or synthesizes a single answer out of what the most relevant top answers from the search are. That's really what retrieval augmented generation is all about. It's do either a traditional lexical keyword search or a vector search. Both can be relevant in different circumstances. But you take those results, you go, well, I got a bunch of answers that all seem to be roughly on point. Hey, large language model, can you synthesize these into a direct response that, combined with the original question, answers in direct human understandable terminology exactly what the answer to the question would be?
Yeah, Patrick's right on the nose there with that. I couldn't agree more that their path is on the right. I think that what we're going to start seeing in the future is expert models, topic expert models. I actually built an infrastructure called Market Muse First Draft that built topic expert models long ago when they were way too expensive. And so we actually canned that. It's totally too early for the market. But I think you're going to see topic expert models. So let's just say you are an expert on SEO, right? Well, wouldn't you want your RAG your RAG output to reflect that, right? Maybe maybe I want a medical tuned outcome. Maybe I want a business finance tuned outcome. You're going to start to see RAG implementations that use knowledge graphs, use Google's knowledge graph, use these custom expert models. And it's going to change the way we feel about this. And maybe it's the Jennifer specific model that's tuning my outputs, right? Maybe it's all of my business system. Maybe it's the Salesforce specific model if I'm Mark Benioff typing queries in, right? In my desk. And we're not very far away from that. And so I think that's the next horizon. And I think you're going to see it come from Azure and Microsoft. So
and Jeff, to your point, actually, when you think about, as you mentioned earlier, with memory being on in something like ChatGPT, and it gives you answers that are reflective of all of your previous questions, that is in large part a Jeff model.
Right. Yes.
Giving Jeff answers to Jeff questions.
You got it. And I did that. It would have been a little too long in the tooth for this, and I was already a little long in the tooth with my walkthrough. But I did that with. What is CRM? I asked a question to get the citation for Pipedrive's pricing, right? As an example, and then every other time if I continued on that thread and I asked the same exact question, what are the best CRMs? Pipedrive would always appear number one. So it was actually even because I asked one question about that. And the fundamentals of how language models work, it's aiming to predict what I effectively want to hear. And that there's a whole long thing on that, but that's a great thing. But if you ask ChatGPT a whole lot of questions about yourself, you're going to hear a whole lot of responses about yourself, even when you don't ask. And that's something that people have to get used to. The personalization could give them a little CEO's bias, I'd say.
Right. You want to, we have a few more slides to get through the just concepts, but we are hitting all the bases, but we're running a little short on time. So I want to just cover a couple things. This is just talking about how the fact that the search, any kind of a search GPT or any type of conversational search or any type of LLM interaction is really building on that conversation, right? You're getting multiple interactions, you're building on prior questions, you're building just as the example you're just talking about. And so, this is really where you're trying to, and this came from a website, DataCamp. So I have the citation there. But again, it's getting more personalized responses. It's making you feel like a conversation with somebody who has knowledge, right? And then you're getting real-time data. So that's kind of the idea here. Gabrielle had another question, but I think this is kind of saying, how is it going to just synergize, disrupt current search? How will Gen search change the SEO market? Will orgs do different stuff to prepare content? And then if you're all using LLMs to create content, how different is it going to be? And the challenge is it's going to be problematic because Google is detecting where the content is human generated and it's ranking authentic content to preference. So this is really saying, yes, this is disrupting the SEO market. Organizations are going to have to be doing some things different, but there's the same principles still apply, right? When you start looking at content and the value of content. And the whole idea is this, we as humans can tell when content is AI generated, right? You just get that feeling, oh, this is AI bullshit, right? But you have to think about what's the unique value of this information. So authenticity and your expertise and your knowledge is going to be a very strong signal. And I think eventually, like I label my stuff when I have something that comes from an LLM, I label it, right? And a lot of people are not labeling this. So I think you're going to have to either badge human content or other type of content. And keyword purchases are not going to be as effective. We need to maybe think about some type of phrasing that we need to purchase. Now, Gabriel had a follow-on question, and he said, what about using GPT to generate effective search queries, right? Does that make sense? And it's funny because there are modular RAG has mechanisms to rewrite the queries and resubmit the queries and re-rank the results. But why don't you talk a little bit about the idea of using the GPT to generate the search queries themselves?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I do it all the time.
I'll be your backup plan on that one, Patrick. So there's a lot unpacked back. It's a great question.
Yeah. Using it to generate queries in order to get, because I have said for a long time that when in the whole search, in the whole information retrieval world, the one thing that people want, the one thing that people will buy is relevant results. At the end of the day, whatever the mechanism is to get there, when you go to that little box, what you care about is what I want back is relevant results. And anything I can do to create relevance or to boost the relevance of what I get back, that's really what this whole conversation is about. Relevance. And so relevance is predicated on understanding what the intent of the query is, the intent of what the user's asking. And the more we can read their mind and more we can read the context, the more we can gather additional information about what they want, just like we were saying, the more we're going to get to that point of relevant results. Jeff?
No, I think you hit it right on the nose. I always like to make sure a question like this is what do you expect to receive? Because it is not giving you information about your site and where you have strengths and weaknesses, maybe gaps you need to fill, right? It's giving you linguistics lessons effectively, right? So do I love doing keyword discovery? Absolutely. But are those absolutely the ones you should be building against? Possibly not. So thinking about bouncing back and forth, you have a word in mind, you have a journey in mind, you're doing linguistics research, and that's something that language models are beautiful at. So be thinking about it in those terms, and absolutely, you can get collections of language, linguistics, context, I just did a webinar with someone who's using the term context libraries.
So that you know
Build those,
we're gonna talk
build
about-
build those libraries. But it's a great question. Build those libraries, but remember, you're not getting what you would get out of a keyword research tool or a topic analysis tool.
I do want to get this last question in, but we just talked about user behavior and psychology. We've talked about some of that stuff. We talked about the fundamental changes, and then it all comes back to good content. But E. Anderson, I think it might be Eric. The more I hear, the more this sounds like very ECM like, in that the entry vector of the user can be defined by the ontology associated with their context and role. Piggybacking on Gabriel's question, would that hybrid approach be faster to implement in closed systems, given that the roles of the users are already defined in the enterprise? Excellent question. Absolutely, yes. In the closed section, the closed system is really when you're using retrieval augmented generation, so that you can leverage metadata, explicit metadata on the content as well, for additional signals and additional enriched embeddings into the vector space. And yes, the user context is absolutely critical to this, and using that in the enterprise, because you do know what those roles are, that's really going to give you a huge bang for the buck. But I do want to finalize here with, this is Google guidelines, right? Here's where we have to think about: is it quality content? Does it provide value? If it's produced by, to spread across national, if we're doing good content, or versus generating it, with LLMs, we are going to get better results, period. So it has to be authoritative. It has to provide substantial value. And again, this is what it is. You want to trust it. You want clear sourcing. You want evidence of expertise. This is at the bottom of the hour, at the bottom line, at the top of the, whatever you want to say, top line, bottom line, is it's quality content that's relevant to the user and appropriate to the user. And I know we are 1 minute over, so I do want to suggest that people download my article if you haven't already on retrieval augmented generation. We're going to have our next session in 2 weeks. We can get a physical copy too. Our next session in 2 weeks. Here's our contact information. Looking forward to having you all back on the session in 2 weeks. Thank you so much. Boy, you had a flurry of questions in here. Everybody appreciates that question. I know, and we got to drop. We all got to drop. Thank you so much, guys. This has been a tremendous, very exciting conversation, and I'm really glad to have you in. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye, all. Great questions.
Thanks.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay. Bye now.